Happy Sabbath, everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
So, this is the last Sabbath, the last Black History moment for the month until next year. And when thinking about what to do, there are a lot of people, a few suggestions here and there, but for some reason, this time around, what spoke to me was more about just telling the timeline of Black history from the end of slavery to where we are now. And I'm going to condense it because there's a lot.
Amen.
There's a lot. So if you hear something new, wonderful. If it encourages you to, go back and look up something else, great. Most of this you already know, but it's, so it might be a refresher, it might be a learning moment, but let's go through it. So, to begin, the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, and the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime. So that was the big one that everyone loved, no more slavery. The Reconstruction period was between 1865 and 1877, and that was Reconstruction, pretty much, hey, slavery is over, now let's rebuild. So there are other amendments that came into play to supplement Amendment 13, and that was Amendment 14, which stated that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction, therefore, are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside, and you had to be 21 years of age to vote. Next was the 15th Amendment, and it granted African American men the right to vote. Wonderful, great. You also had the Civil Rights Act of 1875. All of that was wonderful, great, and you're thinking, now we can start doing, wonderful things. We're free from slavery, we can buy houses, we can have land and all of that, but not so much, because unfortunately, what happens when you have a lot of good in history, it's coupled with a lot of bad. Anyone who's lived long enough will know that personal history or just from reading. And so you had situations like the Supreme Court saying that separate but equal was legal, and it being upheld in Plessy versus Ferguson. So then you had Jim Crow laws. Now, Jim Crow was a recollection of states and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. And they were named after a Black minstrel show. It was kind of like a blackface caricature about Black people being not the smartest. I'll just put it PG, being not the smartest. And so it was actually a show that post the amendments, post Reconstruction, actually now stood for actual laws that were meant to put Black people in their place, or Negroes in their place. So part of that was also coupled with the Black Code. Now, the Black Code was for newly elected, they were put in place by newly elected Southern state legislatures, largely dominated by former Confederate leaders, enacting Black codes, which were repressive laws that strictly regulated the behavior of Black citizens and effectively kept them dependent on white planters. So, for example, Mississippi's law required Black people to have written evidence of employment for the upcoming year as of January. So, if they left before the end of January, if they left their contract before the end of their contract, which was supposed to be for a year, they would be forced to forfeit earlier wages. So let's say they had employment from January to August, and then no more employment. They would actually forfeit their wages from January to August and still be subject to arrest. So there were just ridiculous laws put in place to keep Black people in check. So those are Jim Crow laws and Black codes. You can definitely go back and read. Everything I'm saying is encouragement to go back and read up on what's going on. So between that period of going back of 1865, let me make sure. Between that period of 1865, or rather 1877, after the closure of Reconstruction, and 1954, there was unrest. Once again, you had these, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, but then you had all these other sub-laws that pretty much negated those amendments. And so what you had were just laws that said, hey, stay out of our community. We want white tenants in our community. You want a job? Too bad. These jobs are for whites only. You had people saying, hey, we don't want you in our schools, we don't want you in our neighborhoods, we don't want you in our restaurants. If you're allowed in certain places, then you have to go through the back or through a separate entrance. And this is the kicker. If you can see this, on the left it says, Jesus saves. And then the lady is holding a poster saying, we do not welcome the coloreds. I'm not quite sure who is being saved here, because if you're not welcoming your brothers and sisters, then good luck with that. But then so you have that, but then you also have segregation is morally wrong. Segregation is morally wrong, support southern citizens, and you have even on this side here on the left, end segregation in America. And you can't quite see the small sign down there, but it's pretty much indicating that it's a store, and the man owns the store and saying, hey, everyone is welcome here. Segregation makes no sense. So you have those who are saying, we don't want you here. You have those who are saying, you're welcome here. And then you have those who are, this is beautiful, I love this picture, because you can tell they're singing. I don't know what song they're singing, you can just imagine, maybe it's We Shall Overcome.
Could be.
Perhaps, it could be, they sang it a lot.
Could be.
So there they are singing, hands together, singing together, wanting to end segregation. And they're usually, you can think of other stances, but they're usually three stanzas. There's the, we don't want you, we want you, and the, we're okay with you as far as you don't ruffle any feathers. And this is this. If you can read it, it says, or if you can't, it says, Southern whites are the Negro's best friend, ... but no integration. So we are okay with you as far as you don't interfere with our lives in any possible way. I don't know about you, but that sounds like rejection. I'm just saying. Yeah. So you have that whole period of unrest. You have the period of, people know that they have rights, but it's been denied to them, and they're fighting for their rights, and there's all this commotion going on, and you have, black neighborhoods that are thriving. They're, saying to themselves, okay, they don't want us in their neighborhoods, fine. We'll have a wonderful black neighborhood over here. We'll have our banks, we'll have our stores, we'll just do our own thing over here. And over and over and over again, you read about, for some reason, the white folks being angry or jealous, there are different words being used, that the black folks are thriving, and then they invade their cities. They come up with some weird thing like, hey, that black person winked at that white lady, or this person was walking down the street and looked at this person wrong way, or a black guy raped a white lady. Usually they're all false, pretty much all false. But that would give them an excuse to go into a black neighborhood and destroy it and just kill all sorts of people. One movie that I remember watching was Rosewood. I'm just going to say that. Watch the movie and you have some reactions. I don't want to tell you how to feel, but I know how I felt after watching it. So Rosewood was one of those movies that just gave you an example of the lives of black people trying to do their own thing and then being interrupted. So we move on to Brown versus Board of Education. And with Brown versus Board of Education, it became famous because a plaintiff named Oliver Brown filed a class action lawsuit against the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1951 after his daughter, Linda Brown, was denied entrance to Topeka's all-white elementary school. In his lawsuit, Brown claimed that schools for black children were not equal to the white schools and that segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which holds that no state can deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So that was the law that desegregated schools. Yay! Wonderful. But like I said earlier, with all good comes bad, so we'll get to that later. And then you have, a series of, actions. You have protests, you have speeches, you have a lot of things going on. You have people suing, Board of Education and suing other entities, and you have a lady called Claudette. And I grouped her with Rosa Parks because they did the same thing, but a lot of people know about Rosa Parks, but not Claudette, and I did not know about Claudette. And Claudette was, on March 2nd, 1955, Colvin was riding home on a city bus after school when a bus driver told her to give up her seat to a white passenger. She refused, saying, "It's my constitutional right to sit here as much as any lady. I paid my fare. It's my constitutional right." Colvin first compelled to stand her ground. Colvin felt compelled to stand her ground. I felt like Sojourner Truth was pushing on one shoulder and Harriet Tubman was pushing on the other, saying, "Sit down, girl." I was glued to my seat. Colvin became one of the 4 plaintiffs in the Browder versus Gale case, along with Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, Mary Louise Smith, and Janita Reese, who was initially named the plaintiff in the case but withdrew early due to outside pressure. This decision in the 1956 case ruled that Montgomery's segregation bus system was unconstitutional. Segregated bus system was unconstitutional. So there, you have a win. So what makes this remarkable, and what also makes this story not well known to some people might know it like Peter. He knows all the stories about black people. He's wonderful that way. What makes this wonderful is that she was 15. She was 15. And unfortunately, that was also part of the reason why she was not well known, because the civil rights movement at the time felt like she was too young to handle the pressure of all the attacks that would come to her as a 15-year-old, and she was pregnant at the time. So they didn't want what happens now, which is when something happens to a black person now, people go back to their history and go, "Oh, well, they stole from this store when they were 12 years old, and so they deserve to die for their, for this incident that happened." That happens a lot now, and so that was something that back then they thought about and they didn't want to happen. Like, we don't want her character smeared and this process not move forward because of this, because she's young and because she's pregnant. So we're going to go with Rosa Parks. So that's why everyone remembers and knows Rosa Parks as, the person who led the whole bus sitting movement. But it actually started 9 months earlier with Colvin. And then we move on to, so obviously this is not an exhaustive list. I'm just picking moments here and there. And we move on to the Little Rock 9. So this is a picture of Colvin. I'm sorry, I didn't put it up earlier. But this is her, 15. I know. Wow. I don't know about you, but I wasn't doing anything like that at 15. Couldn't dream of doing anything like that at 15. That's courage. And then we move on to the Little Rock 9. Now, this was a group of 9 African-American students enrolled in Little Rock Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas, on September 4, 1957. Their enrollment was followed by the Little Rock crisis, in which the students were initially prevented from entering the racially segregated schools by the National Guard that had been deployed by Oval, I'm probably going to mess this up, Forbes, the governor of Arkansas. However, on the 29th of September, the students were permitted entrance into the school after being escorted by federal troops deployed by President Dwight Eisenhower. So that's just a little story, but really what's missing in the story is the fact that they were spat on, they were attacked, they were just belittled, berated, the physical violence, all sorts of, abuse was rendered on them. And it took the president of the United States to say, no, this has to happen because it's legal. So that's how much gall people had, This is the law, but the governor still felt like he could push in the National Guard to prevent it from happening. And then you have the Greensboro sit-in, which was a civil rights protest that started in 1960 when 4 young African-American students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, Ezell Blair Jr., David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil, staged a sit-in at a segregated Woolworth lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and refused to leave after being denied service. They sat in until the restaurant closed, left, and then returned the following day with even more of their fellow students. The sit-in movement soon spread to college towns throughout the South. Though many of the protesters were arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, or disturbing the peace, their actions made an immediate and lasting impact, forcing Woolworth and other establishments to change their segregation policies. So once again, same thing happened to them where they were attacked, and other students who did in other towns were attacked, and I believe there were even a few deaths here and there. Now this one is, the Freedom Riders. So the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, had issued a ruling in Syracuse versus Carolina Coach Company in 1955 that had explicitly denounced the Plessy versus Ferguson doctrine of separate but equal in interstate bus travel. However, the ICC failed to enforce its ruling, and Jim Crow travel laws remained in force throughout the South. Freedom Riders were groups of white and African American civil rights activists who participated in freedom rides bus trips through the American South in 1961 to protest segregated bus terminals. Freedom Riders tried to use whites-only restrooms and lunch counters as bus stations in Alabama, South Carolina, and other southern states. The groups were confronted by arresting police officers, as well as horrific violence from white protesters along their routes, but also drew international attention to the civil rights movements. So in this instance, they were traveling from, I forgot where they were traveling, but I believe they were traveling to Alabama, and they were stopped by a mob that had followed them and actually threw a bomb into their bus. They had to evacuate the bus and were beaten. They were bloody by the time this whole ordeal was over, and this is just the picture of what's happened to the bus. Luckily, no one died, but still, this is horrific and scary. And then you have the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, also known as the March on Washington or the Great March on Washington. So the same, was held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, August 28, 1963. The purpose of the march was to advocate for civil rights and economic rights of African Americans. At the march, final speaker, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, delivered the historic I Have a Dream speech, in which he called for an end to racism. There were over 250,000 people in attendance, and as you can see, it's a bunch of people of all races, all ages, 250,000. That was powerful. And then you had this. So all that has been mentioned so far, they got attacked, that's true, but there are all actions that changed the course of history. The sit-ins, after that, people were allowed to sit in restaurants, African Americans were allowed to sit in restaurants and have lunch and all of that. And the ride-ins, Freedom Riders, they also enacted change, but along with that comes violence. And so this is the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. On September 15, 1963, a bomb exploded during Sunday service in 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, killing 4 young girls. Ada Mae Collins, 14, Cynthia Wellesley, 14, Carol Robertson, 14, and Carol Denise McNair, 11. The church bombing was the third in Birmingham in 11 days, after a federal court came down to integrate Alabama's school system. Alabama's Governor George Wallace made preserving racial segregation one of the central goals of his administration, and Birmingham had one of the most violent and lawless chapters of the KKK. When thousands of black protesters assembled at this crime scene, Wallace sent hundreds of police and state troops to the area to break up the crowd. So he never sent anything for the actual bombing. He set police officers over to break up the crowd of the people who came to support or to, for condolences. So two young black men were killed that night, one by police and one by a racist gang. Robert Chambliss, a well-known Klans member, was initially charged with the murder but was later cleared, given 6 months in jail and a $100 fine for buying dynamite. Years later, the case was reopened by the Alabama Attorney General, and Chambliss was given life in prison. He had 3 accomplices. One died before being convicted, and the other 2 were convicted and given life in prison. And the most recent was convicted in 2002. So this happened in 1963, and the last person to be convicted was in 2002. So it just shows how far it spans. So when people say, oh, well, I don't want to jump ahead, but when people say, oh, everything is back to normal and it's wonderful and it's friendly and blah, 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 I'm like, no, those people are still alive. Those people who threw bombs into the buses are still alive. So no, it doesn't just end like that. So those were the 4 girls. And then this was the, last picture here. This was the march. Sorry, I've lost my notes. Okay, this is called Bloody Sunday. So on September 15, 1963, oh, no, this is Bloody Sunday, though. And you had a number of people, Martin Luther King included, who were marching, and they got stopped. I have my notes. Give me a moment. And they got stopped and were beaten and were attacked, and there were about 60,000 of them that were on their way to Salem. And after this, when it became publicized that this is what's happening, interestingly enough, this was caught on video, and it was shared during the news, and it was actually shared during the time of the, I'm going to mispronounce it, Nuremberg trials, the Nazi trials. And so it was really interesting because a lot of people compared the trial to what was going on in America. So it was really interesting because they aired it on the same night. So just one of the things that happened during that period. And then you have civil rights leaders who were killed, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, well known already. So don't really need to go into detail about them, but once again, great people who were, died prematurely. So we have all of that, and then we have the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Months earlier, we had the passage of the Civil Rights in 1964. We had the passage of the, sorry, I can't find my notes. We had pretty much making it illegal to prevent different races from marrying. In 1967, I believe that was, this Civil Rights Act to vote again, because once again they had prevented people from voting, so it was kind of like to make sure that, hey, yes, we can vote. And so you had all those wonderful things happen in the mid-1960s, which was officially an end to the Jim Crow laws. But even with that ending, you still had unrest from that period to now. So right now, what we have, Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter was organized in 2013 by 3 Black organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. They created Black Lives, a Black-centered political will and movement-building project called Black Lives Matter. It was in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin in the acquittal of, not Trayvon Martin, in the Trayvon Martin case. It is a decentralized grassroots movement led by activists in local chapters who organize their own campaigns and programs. And so you've had marches for Trayvon Martin, for Breonna Taylor, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, and the like. And, when I go through just what I've gone through, and when I read about history or watch a movie like Rosewood or anything like that, what builds up in me is rage. It does. I have to admit it. It doesn't sound Christian, but it's not a sin to be angry. It's what you do with it. And so that's what builds up in me. And then I have to take about 2 months off before I can watch something else or learn about something else. But the reason why I went through all of this wasn't just for the sake of, hey, it's Black History Month, here's history. It's more of, Black history is American history. Black history is intertwined with American history. You can't separate the two. Black history is the past, the present, and the future. You still have people fighting for rights now. You have people who were back, during all the fights and riots of the 1960s, or the Ku Klux Klan and all of that, they're still alive now. So when people say that racism is over, I don't know which world you're living in. When they say everything is wonderful and peaceful, I wish it were so, and one day it will be by the grace of God when we're all with Him, but it's not now. It definitely is not now. And so, when you feel angry, something to remember is Romans 12:19. Do not take revenge, my dear friend, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. Luke 6:27-28. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. That is not something to be taken lightly. That's something that you have to put into practice, because it's natural for you to be angry and vengeful. It is. Be honest, it is. It's our nature. But the Lord has shown us that even though the road has been really hard, even though it seems like we take steps forward, but we take more steps backward, we actually are moving forward. And so when you have young girls like Claudette able to just sit down and say, I'm not moving at age 15, when you have all those sit-ins, when you have all, people nowadays, even today, young children who are able to hold posters and walk down the street and say, my life matters. It encourages you to keep the fight going in love, in peace. But one of the things I also want to mention is that when I was going through all of this, all the pictures that I saw, there are always black and white people and people of other races in it. It's not just a black thing. So the picture that I showed where you had the men saying, I love black people as far as they don't get in my way, as far as we don't integrate, makes no sense. It makes no sense. I love this poster here. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor, by Desmond Tutu. That is very real. So I'm going to end with this, Zechariah 7:9. This is what the Lord Almighty said, administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. We are in this world together. We claim to be brothers and sisters. You cannot love God and not love your fellow man. It doesn't work. You might want it to work, but it doesn't work. So, thank you.